Hello, everyone, and welcome to our first episode of this season, the TEPSA Talk podcast. I'm your host, Todd Nesloni. I'm the Director of Culture here at the Texas Elementary Principals and Supervisors Association. And our goal for this season of episodes is to bring you different thought leaders from around the world just to share their expertise in areas that matter to you, the pre-K through 8th grade school leader. I am so excited about this week's guest. Yes, he's a very good friend of mine and I adore him as a friend, but this man is one of the most creative, energetic speakers out there. He was a principal when I was a principal, doing some of the most amazing things. We often challenged each other and tried to one-up each other constantly. But my buddy, Adam Dovico, is on here today. And Adam, welcome. Go ahead and tell everybody a little bit about yourself.
Well, thank you, friend. It's so good to be reunited with you as always. And yes, we did have some very friendly battles over the years with trying to one up each other, but always in a productive way, right? So, again, my name is Adam Dovico. I am in North Carolina, and I serve currently as academic director and professor at Wake Forest University in the School of Professional Studies, where I lead the Master's in Educational Leadership program. So, getting to now train the next generation of school principals and leaders. Super exciting.
I love it. Well, Adam, today's conversation is going to be all about student leadership. This is something that I know you and I are both very passionate about, just making sure that we just identify every kid as having that leadership potential. And that's somewhat easy to do in the classroom as a classroom teacher, but that can be a little bit difficult to view as a school leader when you're not used to thinking about it that way. When did student leadership become something that was like super at the top of your list, higher on your radar kind of thing?
Yeah, much like you, I started as a fifth grade teacher. And I think there's something about teaching fifth grade that somewhat like propels you into that student leadership role. If your elementary school goes up to fifth grade, the fifth graders are always treated as the leaders. And you always hear that phrase, right? Like
Yeah.
fifth grade leadership. And in some ways, it kind of internalizes as for you as a teacher as well. And so I think from the very, very first year of my teaching, I just embodied that idea of yes, student leadership, but as the fifth grade teacher, I needed to accelerate and support, cultivate that student leadership in my students. So yeah, I guess for me, it started in day one, and it took form in a lot of the activities I did, the clubs I led, the opportunities that were put in front of me and my students.
Well, you had a lot of unique teaching experience, whether that's in different public schools or at the Ron Clark Academy, and even leading your own school as a school principal. So stepping into that administrator role, what are some ways that you really got to grow the students on your campus into leaders?
Well, I think first and foremost is something that I talk about regularly as I go around and talk to audiences, and that's the idea of my greeters and ambassadors. And if you're not familiar with that concept, it's the idea that in every classroom there is an assigned job, just like you would for any other classroom job. There's an assigned job that makes a student a classroom greeter. So when someone walks into that classroom, they are trained to go up to that person and whether it's introduce themselves, welcome them to the classroom. The purposes vary, but the idea is always that the student is going to take charge and be kind of the host of that room. And as the principal, I created several layers of that. We had a hallway greeter as well. I mentioned ambassadors, which is kind of like my greeters on steroids, because these kids got extra special training and they did school tours for me. They came into community events. I mean, these were really like my right hand kids. And so when we talk about student leadership, it truly is an opportunity to give students the chance to be in the spotlight and make themselves feel like they are in charge. And it's a really empowering experience.
Now, I know you talk a lot too, and you've designed something where you really focus on the idea of prerequisite skills. No matter what age students you're working with, even in adults, it's important to kind of go over this kind of prerequisite skills of leadership because they don't always come with the same set and not everybody defines things the same ways. So I know you created an acronym called SPECIAL that you use with your students. And so where did that come about? Why did you start doing that? And how has that kind of helped lead your work?
Sure. So, I mean, from very early on in my teaching career, I always had an expectation of teaching kids how to, at a minimum, acknowledge you. So like it drives me nuts when you're like talking to a kid and they just walk by you like you don't
Yeah.
exist. So that concept I think started early on, but the formalities of it started, I guess, after I was working at the Ron Clark Academy, and I realized that there were a lot of teachers that went to the Ron Clark Academy and really wanted to have their kids uh, work and talk and hold a conversation like the kids at the academy did. And I realized quickly that a lot of teachers wanted to do it but didn't know how. And so I created Special simply as like a starting guide. I mean, I certainly didn't invent the handshake or, charm. Like I didn't invent that stuff. I just put it together in a little bit of a package with a little bow on it to
Yeah.
say, hey, here's a starting point. So if you're looking for a way to help kids remember. I'm a big acronym fan if you get to know me. And so Special was just a simple way to help teachers and adults teach kids these basic, like you said, prerequisite or social or soft skills, whatever you want to call
Yeah.
them. And frankly, honestly, I think there's a lot of adults that benefit from this as well.
And I found that so important when trying to train students in a thing to make sure that I train the adults first. Because sometimes we can assume just because they're educated or they went through this kind of system or they've had this life experience that they're all on the same page. But as a school leader, you learn very quickly that you can never assume anybody's on the same page for anything, even if y'all were in this exact same training at the exact same time. So I think having that kind of set standards, and I love too that you often talk about, even though you created Special, it's not like the one be all end all. Like you can go and edit it and manipulate it to match your mascot or your school or whatever you want those skills to be for your students to have.
Well, and think about age appropriateness too, right? I mean, a kindergartner probably is not going to be as complex in the skill sets as a fifth grader or a middle schooler or a high schooler. So, yeah, it's nothing more than a starting block, and I encourage people to use it as a way to pivot, shift, use what you want from it, but treat the concept of teach explicit teaching of social skills as a high regard, just like you would for math or reading. Because at the end of the day, I know no teacher out there would say, hey, you're going to go ahead at the end of this school year and take this really big, important test and not teach anything leading up to it. So why do we continue in our society to send young adults out into the real world for job interviews and all these big opportunities and never teach them actually how to have conversations? So it's like we're setting them up for this big test to fail. So I never wanted a student walking through my classroom or my school to be set up for failure. And so this little toolbox of skills that we can teach them to exhibit strong leadership may not be used today, may not be used tomorrow, but somewhere down the line in that back pocket, oh yeah, I remember when I had to learn how to shake hands, or I learned how to nod when someone was speaking, or whatever the skill is.
Well, one thing that I love about you is you're always looking at every kid having that leadership potential, especially those students that society wouldn't necessarily view them as the quote unquote best leader, or maybe other teachers on campus or families or whatever. We're always looking at every kid has that potential in them. And you had a unique opportunity at your school because you had a certain subset of students that your school specifically served that you especially got to amplify, that things don't have to stand in your way. Everybody's capable of leading. Tell us a little bit about that.
Sure. So, like you said, leadership is oftentimes pictured in this little box. Like, this is what you need to look like. This is what you have to have in order to be a leader. And I don't believe in that. I truly believe everyone can be a leader. My wife is a pediatrician. She's a doctor, and she can confirm through all of her classes, there is not one gene that says this is the leadership gene. So when we say born leader, it can't be true. There's no such
Yeah.
thing as a natural born leader because there's no gene that makes you a leader. So I believe everyone can receive the training and the opportunities to be a leader. And so, yes, in my school where I was a principal, we had a deaf and hard of hearing population. And so I wanted to really empower my students who were either deaf or hard of hearing and really make them feel like, yes, you can be a leader as well. And so any number of things from being a classroom greeter or an ambassador to at my Friday morning rallies when we brought the whole school together in person, And some of them stood up on stage and taught all of us sign language. And so just small little opportunities that really empowered and showed that everyone truly can be a leader when given the opportunities.
Well, and you also did something really cool at your school, I believe, too, is, part of growing those student leaders is making sure that kids feel comfortable in who they are and the gifts that they bring to the table. But to be able to do that, they need adults in their lives who shine a light on the greatness of what they bring. And so I love that even at your school, there were people like you who didn't know sign language, but you knew you had students on your campus that knew it. So you started learning sign language, or some of the signs that were hanging around your school had the sign language way to say it so that people could do that as well. And I think that's really important to bring up, because when we're talking about student leaders, oftentimes confidence is one of the biggest things standing in the way of them leading. And so as adults, we have to lead the way in that and really helping them see that. When did you realize things like that? Like, I really want to make sure this signage is in this kind of language, or that I'm putting forth the effort, even though, yes, I'm exhausted. I have 1,000 things on my plate, but this is important too. Like, when did that really resonate with you?
Well, I mean, from my own personal standpoint, like I'm a lifelong learner. I love learning different languages and different cultures, and so that's always been ingrained in me. And so learning sign language was a natural inquiry and interest. I'm not very good at it. I used to learn. I used to sit in my pre-K deaf and hard of hearing class, and the kids, when they first started at like 4 years old, I could like I can keep par with them with some very basic, like I want, or, I need kind of stuff. And then usually within about a month or two, they'd kill me. And, they were way beyond my learning at that point. So, my learning was a little bit slower, but from just incorporating visual,
Mm-hmm.
visual reminders and symbols and all that kind of stuff, that really came as a school. I don't want to take any credit for the things that, the signs or anything like that. I think what I could say I did was create a culture of um, opening the doors for that. And so when a teacher came to me and was like, "Hey, can I do this?" Sure.
Yeah.
One of my teachers came up to me and said, "Ooh, wouldn't it be cool if we did our letters?" So our school's name was Moore, Moore. So it's really short. It's only 5 letters. And so we created the sign, uh, like ASL hand
Yeah.
signs for Moore in letters, giant letters above the doorway. So it's spelled out Moore. One of my teachers started a trend. She got the sign language for her last name and put it outside of her door. And so when others saw that, I mean, it was
Yeah.
instantaneous, because teachers love copying others. And so we all did that, and we all put our names outside of our doors in ASL. So I cannot take credit for 99% of that stuff, but I'll say I definitely encouraged people to be creative. And when those ideas came, we celebrated them.
I love that. And I love that that's such a great example for kids to see that as well. Well, Adam, something that I want to shift gears and talk about is something that you really inspired me on at my school was student-led parent-teacher conferences. Every school, no matter where you work, you know what a parent-teacher conference is. You know those are coming up at some point during the year where you're going to have to connect with that student's family and talk to them about goals or how they're performing or what help you need, things like that. And one of the things that I learned from you was the importance of giving that agency back to the student, of allowing them to be the voice. But to do that, I mean, they have to know how to set goals. They have to know how to talk about their work. But watching you and your students at your school take charge of that was powerful, to see the types of conversations kids of all ages are able to have when it comes to their own progress. So talk to us a little bit about those student-led conferences and kind of what that looked like.
Yeah, so it actually needs one step back before we move forward. So it really starts with the idea of student data notebooks.
Mm-hmm.
And that was an opportunity for the students to literally track their own progress, set goals for themselves, analyze data at some points. And so that student data notebook was the gateway to have these conferences. So throughout the year, students created, maintained, and so on their notebooks. And then at some point in the school year, we ended up making it 2 times during the year in more recent years. But we had these student-led conferences where we would invite the parents, guardians, family members, friends, everyone came eventually. And the students got a chance to literally showcase their work. And the cool part about that is they really took pride in what they were talking about. It's one thing, and we'll talk traditionally, right? Traditionally,
Yeah.
the teacher, the parent, they sit down, they talk about, well, here's how the kid's doing. Parent says, yep, that sounds about right. Teacher says, here's what we're going to do. Parent says, sounds good.
Yeah.
And there's a key stakeholder not in this conversation, the kid. The kid is ultimately the one doing the work, is ultimately the one taking the test or setting the goals. So by having the student intentionally involved in this process changed the whole dynamic of these conferences. And the pride from the parents seeing their kids talk about their data and their progress and their growth was really cool. And so, even for a kid that might be struggling a little bit, growth is celebrated just as much as achievement, sometimes even more. And so it was just really neat seeing kids say, hey, here's where I started in August, September. Here's where I am in February, March. And look at this growth that I made all along. And so the data notebooks and the conferences are just such a great part of what I was able to have in my school. And actually, I'm working with a school tomorrow on it. And so I'm really excited to help another school get these things going.
I love that. Well, Adam, something that you and I also have in common is that we have both been student council advisors on our campuses, whether that was as teachers or anything else. And I know for me, like, I loved being a student council advisor when I was a fifth grade teacher, like just to get to have that opportunity to grow kids in that way. And I would say, like, if your school's not doing student council, I don't care what age you're working with, you should have some type of leadership team like that, because it's such a cool thing and it's so easy to do. But talk to me a little bit about your experience with something like student council.
So I got to go back in time for a moment, because there was a little point in my schooling, personal schooling, that got me really interested in this. So back in eighth grade, we had student council at my middle school. And I was kind of a nerdy kid, did well in school, but I had friends and stuff. And so I was like, you know what, I'm going to run for student council in eighth grade. And I was up against this girl, Krista, who was very, very popular. All right, very popular. And so I'll never forget it. She wrote me a note that said, "I'm going to destroy you." And I was like, all right. So my confidence was not high. But long story short, I beat her, major upset. All right, big time upset, and I was elected to student council, and so that just kind of started my interest in this idea of governance and student council kind of stuff. And flash forward to becoming a teacher, again, teaching fifth grade. I don't know, there's just something about being a fifth grade teacher that I think opens up these doors to, some opportunities, like being an advisor for student council, which I did, I think since year one. So I probably got 10, 12, 14 years of student council, something or another experience behind me, including, as I know you did as well, with houses. As we both did the house system. And so the idea of student council really just morphed into house council at recent schools that I've been a leader at.
Well, I love that story, because I've known you for years and I had never heard that. So I learned something new today. But, I ask about student council as well, because when I was a student council here in Texas, I every year would sign up for this training with my students where they would go and get trained while I got trained as an adult. And I was like obsessed with this training because it was so good. And then I became a principal and became a member of TEPSA and found out TEPSA is the one that leads those trainings. So if you're listening right now and you're like, I like the idea of a student council, or we have a student council, but we need help in like teaching them their roles, and the volunteer who's helping, what are they supposed to do? TEPSA actually does student leadership workshops all across the state of Texas all fall. So you can find one that you want to go to. You can sign your kids and your advisor up, and they can go and spend a day learning about how to be a leader and all these other fun things, and get to know kids from other regions. But you can just head over to TEPSA.org to get that information, or contact anybody at TEPSA will help you. But I'm obsessed with them, and I can't believe I didn't even know TEPSA did them because they're so stinking good that I make sure to talk about it all the time now. But Adam, I want to kind of shift gears as we kind of begin to wrap this conversation up. And I know there are going to be administrators who are listening to this and going, I understand student leadership. Like, I get the value. I want to do some of these things. A, where do I begin? And B, a lot of this sounds like I need the teachers on board too. And I don't need them mutiny because I'm adding one more thing to their plate. So talk to me about a little bit from that angle as an administrator, because I know you've got that perspective too.
Yeah, there's always that risk of that one more thing, just like we're already busy enough. This is the straw that breaks the camel's back kind of thing. So there is a fine line. There's a gentle nudge that you have to make to get these things going. I know for me personally, I always wanted to start by modeling. I'm never going to ask one of my teachers to do something that I won't do first. And so I think modeling is really important. And that may include some of my, kind of more go for it type teachers, because every school's got a couple of like go for it teachers. And now I don't want to put all the pressure on them because that often happens and that leads to burnout.
Yeah.
But I definitely want to show like this can be done. And so for me, like with special, I wanted to show that it can be done. So I modeled in a couple classrooms. I trained the whole school. And so it wasn't just another thing necessarily. It was like, hey, let me lead, let me guide this. And then start with one small thing. Sometimes we try to bring, and I've seen this for so many years, especially working at the Ron Clark Academy. People leave from the academy and they're like, I want to change everything. And when you try to change everything, you change nothing.
Yeah.
And so I always encourage people, try one thing, be good at one thing, be successful at one thing, and then try another. And so whether that is student council, whether that is houses or ambassadors or greeters or a clubs are a nice, easy one. Whatever that is, just try something, get good at it. And then you could build that confidence as a staff to move forward with another thing.
And, I would add into this, one of the ways that I really tried to get my team on board was only trying one new idea a year, just like you said, because otherwise it's too much. But I also would kind of set it up as when we are attempting this, it's eliminating these things down the road. So it became a conversation of, if we really are teaching kids these prerequisite skills and we're giving them leadership opportunities and or having student-led conferences or whatever, it's going to be taking something off your plate. Maybe not right away because we've got to get the ball rolling, but by having these issues solved ahead of time, we fix it where it's not something bigger down the road. And I think that's important.
And I'll add as well, sometimes it's about working smarter, not harder. So you're able to even take stuff off. I'll give you the perfect example here. At a school I recently worked at, safety patrol, or not safety patrol, sorry, car rider line was done primarily by all the teachers. Yeah. And so when we brought in and created safety patrol, guess what? Now I'm able to relieve some teachers from having to stand out there. So instead of having 8 or 10 teachers or staff members, I can just have 2 or 3 monitoring the safety patrol. So now I'm having students practice leadership skills, and I'm saving some bandwidth from my staff from having to stand outside doing car rider line. So sometimes it can really benefit, the workload for your staff.
Well, and what I love about this conversation too is if you're listening right now and thinking these are great ideas, but like I couldn't write them down, or I need more information about this or that, Adam and I have you covered. We actually wrote a book together called When Kids Lead that you can check out that has every single idea that Adam and I have mentioned here. If you are a TEPSA member and you got your TEPSA magazine this last quarter, you also saw an article in there about student leadership with some of these ideas. So definitely make sure you're checking out some of those resources to get those. Now, Adam, say somebody's listening today and they're thinking, these are great, but I need to connect more with Adam, or I need Adam to come to my school and work with us. How can they get in touch with you?
Well, I think my name is my handle is down there, and so at Adam Dovico is pretty much on everything. I have a unique enough name where I'm the only one to my knowledge. There might be other Adam Dovicos. I haven't met them yet, but AdamDovico.com is also my website. So one of those ways, feel free to reach out: Twitter, Instagram, website, whatever. It'll get to me, and I will respond.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody, for listening about this conversation about student leadership. Make sure you check out our podcast each week this fall and into the next spring as we offer you brand new episodes every week with thought leaders from around the world. Have a great day. And if you need anything, TEPSA is always here for you.